In today's episode of the Platform Presents podcast, I have an interesting guest here with me today. I'm with Jon May, and he's hailing over from GetGround. He is, by trade, a marketing automation specialist, deep diving very much into HubSpot. So we want to do a little bit of a deep dive on the show in that today. And we really want to learn about GetGround. They basically, are there for property investors, building tools and the platform for them really to get them to be working way more efficiently. We're going to dive into what GetGround is offering for those investors. And without further ado, let's just jump in and say welcome to Jon. Pleased to meet you.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Yeah. So maybe give us a 360 overview. What is GetGround all about in your own words?
Sure, yeah. So GetGround helps buy-to-let landlords, so that's people who are buying property with the sole purpose of renting it out, be able to structure it properly from a legal and accounting perspective. And that sounds very boring, but we use a platform, so it's all incorporated with the UK's Company House, and it helps prepare the taxes and filing to HMRC, our tax body. So it helps it do it all automatically. It's online, and it's just so much less hassle than having to do it yourself and try and get it all sorted. So it's definitely making buy-to-let done better, being our slogan, and helping buy-to-let landlords have a better portfolio experience.
Makes a lot of sense. And is those like private? Are those private investors? Is this companies, institutions? Maybe tell us a little bit about sort of who's benefiting most from GetGround.
So it's mostly private landlords. So most people go, you know what, I want a bit extra income. I could buy a house or property and then rent it out. So a lot of people typically start with one. They don't normally go in with 5 straight away. But there's definitely a case to be made that people start with one, but then grow. So once they've gone one, they're actually, I've got a bit more money. Why don't we do 2 or 3 or 4? So it's kind of trying to scale that as well and help them scale in a way that is a lot less paperwork and a lot easier for them to log in, be able to see all their properties and connecting the bank accounts that we set up for them, and just kind of gives them really smooth experience to kind of digitize the very undigital property market.
Yep. No, that makes a lot of sense. And what would you say? What are the key, let's say, issues or problem that the platform solves for them? So if people listening in that are maybe owning properties or thinking about getting that first one, if not the 5th one, what is the typical challenges that they have that the platform can help them solve easily?
So the main challenge people have is kind of selling the property once they're finished with it, and you have to pay something called stamp duty. One of the things that by putting it in a limited company, so the property is then owned by a limited company, the limited company gives you a lot more flexibility. So you don't have to pay stamp duty. You pay a different kind of tax, which is lower, and equally it's more flexible. So if 2 or 3 of you, your friends wanted to lump in together, you can do that and split the company 3 ways. It's a lot easier to say gift it to other people, and you can kind of chop and sell parts of the company that you couldn't do that with a property. You can't sell half a house. So it's a lot more flexible. And the next stage of the company is a marketplace where people can buy parts of property companies that otherwise they'd have no access to without the full amount of cash that they need to invest.
Which means a property company could then be, for example, 1 or 2 houses or something like that, or 3 houses, 5 houses.
Yeah. So we wrap them so that each property is in each company, is in one company, because it's kind of a lot easier way to do it from an accounting perspective. But it's a lot more flexible, and ultimately we want to try and help people be able to kind of utilize this, even if they might not be able to do it outright themselves.
So interesting. It sounds a little bit even like investing in property and not having to buy the whole one.
That's the dream. Is if you don't have enough money to buy one yourself, you could group a few friends in together and you can share that investment. So it's reducing the barrier, which typically for property investment is quite high.
Yep, that makes total sense. How do folks hear about GetGround? Like, what are sort of client acquisition channels that you guys leverage in order to get the word out?
So when the company originally started, and it still makes up quite a lot of referrals at the minute, is through people or organizations that are involved in property. So there are like strategic partners, so accountants, tax advisors, solicitors. If someone says to them, oh, I'm thinking about doing a buy-to-let company. How should I structure that? I mean, we're the buy-to-let company experts. So if you want to kind of have it in a limited company and kind of get those benefits and flexibility out of it, we're the people who can help you do that for, a lot, because it's automated. It's just it integrates into all the government facilities, and it's just very straightforward and kind of fuss-free, I guess. So.
That makes sense. And you're working in marketing automation. Maybe tell us a little bit about that role. Like what, because a lot of folks obviously trying to get automated more and more processes. We got a lot of marketers listening. What's what's sort of the task that you enjoy or that you work on a lot when it comes to automation? Is it, when people come from the website and a lead comes in? Is that outbound? Like, what's sort of the topics that you dive in on a daily basis?
So a lot of the focus is a lot of the minute on trying to separate out the good leads from the bad leads. So we do a lot of paid advertising, we do a lot of marketing, and we're doing more and more. So the marketing team is kind of really growing as a kind of a very fast-paced startup. It's very much trying to do as much as we can as quickly as we can. But there is we get lots of leads in. Some of them are great leads, some of them are just not great leads, and we want to make sure that we're focusing all our time on the ones that are more likely to convert. So lead scoring and trying to work out, okay, how likely is this person to convert, or are they even in the right situation to be able to convert? If they're not able to get a mortgage, or they don't have enough cash to buy the property, it's unlikely that we might be a good fit for each other. So it's trying to figure out where they are in the intent, but equally how good of a fit we are with them, because there's no point trying to convert someone who's not going to be right for us.
And what's your take on the website? Because a lot of marketers we have on the show, they're very critical with the page. They always try to improve something. They always find things to do better. I'm curious, like, what do you think about the page in terms of where do you see its strength versus where do you maybe even see room for improvement?
So definitely, I think the front page, the home page, is pretty much where a lot of the dedication goes into, because that's the page that most people are going to see. We've got a very large out-of-home campaign going on at the moment, so that's big posters outside bus stations, tube stations, rail stations in London, and we've seen kind of a big kind of tick as people search for us as we're looking at talking about property investment, and yeah, there's been a huge focus on trying to get it not necessarily pixel perfect, but we want to try and make sure it's converting as many people as possible. We've built a quiz so that people can try and get a bit more of an idea, but equally we can get more data out of them. And from a marketing perspective, it's certainly in marketing automation, I want the data. The more data I can get about people, the better I can communicate with them, the better the communications can be tailored and more suited to them. So the website is very important. It then leads on to our web app, which is where people actually sign up and do all the kind of verification and financial checks and all the standard things that financial companies do. And there's a lot of work. There's a whole product team based on trying to make that journey as smooth and as kind of friction-free as possible. So yeah, a ton of work goes into both the marketing website and also our kind of product itself. But yeah, still lots more to do. We've just moved on to HubSpot, so lots of personalization I think we can start utilizing very quickly as we try to move towards the next best thing and using some of that data in the website.
Very cool, very cool. I mean, you're obviously sort of known for being an email marketing expert, so that's the topic that you've been working on a lot. Like, maybe tell us a little bit, because a lot of marketers that we had on the show, they bring leads in on the website, but then they have challenges, when they, I don't know, download a white paper or whatever to actually re-engage them. Is that sort of, because in a way that's also an email marketing situation. Maybe do you have some experience that you could share? Like, what work at high level, obviously, what works, what doesn't, what do you do? What is things that you see people doing wrong repeatedly that maybe some, easy things to fix?
Yeah, definitely. I think sales channels always, or kind of one-to-one salespeople always work really well. Building that personal connection, especially in like a B2B or kind of more upper B2C segment, is really useful. The biggest mistake I normally see is where people try and over-formalize their emails, where they say, "It was a pleasure to speak to you about this opportunity." You wouldn't say that to a person, so trying to build a human connection. And I appreciate I'm not a copywriter, but I always go and if people propose copy, I always go back and say, okay, would you in real life, say that to someone else. And if you don't, then reword it. Email and pretty much all our comms should sound as if we are speaking them. They should sound very, not necessarily all casual. There are instances where we have to be more formal, but it should sound a very natural conversation. And using big words for the sake of using big words is pretty much one of the things I see that, let's formalize this partnership with and it's very much you could say that in 3 words instead of 10. Simplicity is key, and I think certainly trying to deformalize some of the communications is one of the big opportunities that a lot of companies can have.
On one of your recent posts, you spoke about a good open rate. What makes a good open rate, or in general, makes for good metrics? I mean, obviously, it depends a little bit on the situation, on when they were on the website and sign up, or if it's a cold outreach. But maybe give us a guideline. Like, would you consider to be, well-performing open rates, well-performing reply or click rates for maybe a cold outbound, just so that people can get a little bit of a benchmark when they're trying things?
Sure, yeah. So open rates have become a little more less reliable since Apple's iOS 15 update at the end of last year. But essentially, kind of 20 to 30% is a good kind of baseline. If it's above that, that's great. If it's below that, that's maybe a cause for try and work out who are the least engaged and kind of cut them out. All of the metrics, you can improve each of the individual metrics, but obviously the whole aim is to try and improve all of them at once. So I always, when I do the reporting, I kind of look at it as like an upside down pyramid. So you've got the number of sends at the top, then you've got the number of opens, clicks, and conversions. And ultimately, it's the conversions at the bottom. That's what really drives, obviously, revenue and sales. So it doesn't matter if the open rate is 100%. If nobody then clicks on it, then actually you kind of need to have them all blended together. So there's kind of 4 upside down pyramids. And when I do the reporting, I kind of report that way to try and help people visualize. They open, then they click, then they get in touch or make a purchase, and then they convert, and then they are converted. So it's trying to help, especially stakeholders who might not be too familiar with emails, understand the process of what's going on.
And do you generally tend to recommend to still use like sales-driven copy or purely value-driven copy, where you just try to give value rather than asking or pitching things? Like, what's your experience?
So it very much depends on your audience. So I've worked with companies, my last company I worked for had 13 million customers, and there's so many different segments in there. And speaking to them slightly differently, some people will absolutely want that sales stuff. Some people will absolutely want the value stuff. You can test it. I think testing is key. A/B testing is, if you've got enough people, is absolutely the way to go, because your audience, I can sit here and say, oh, sales always wins. But actually, if your brand and your audience is slightly different, actually that's not going to work. So I always say test to find out what works on your audience, and then every year or so just keep testing just to make sure that you're kind of gathering those learnings, because each audience in each company is completely unique. So yeah, it's difficult to say which one works, because they both work in different situations.
That makes a lot of sense. Appreciate that insight, because I think there's a lot of folks out there trying different things and sometimes being a little bit disencouraged, because it can be quite easily disencouraging with email outreach. But really appreciate your insights. Very, very cool. Maybe one last thing that came up recently on the podcast a bit, which I'm curious about, and it becomes more and more of a topic. You mentioned you guys are running paid advertising. The cookieless future, right? Third-party cookies are not going to be. You mentioned actually I think the Apple update just a couple of seconds ago. Is that something that Chrome, for example, killing third-party cookies by the end of the year? Is that something marketers in your world start talking and thinking about? How do you think about it, or do you think it's more topic? From when it comes, it will come.
I think marketing will adapt. It always has. We're all still here. I think there are a lot of people who always prophesize the doom of whatever next is to come. Yes, I think that we've made choices based on that. So we've moved to HubSpot to try and move away from like third-party integrations, because now everything is, the website is built on HubSpot. Everything is in HubSpot. So we can kind of almost circumvent some of that internal cookie issue. But yeah, in terms of paid advertising, yes, that's going to get more tricky. But in terms of the data, the lead generation campaigns, we're going to have to lean more on the lead gen forms and then try and optimize it in our kind of HubSpot environment. So, but we'll adapt. It just might mean that the ROI decreases a little bit, and we'll just have to try and figure out other ways to try and increase it or change and evolve.
Yeah, makes sense. I have some rapid fire questions because we talked a lot about the company. We talked about what you guys are doing. We talked about growth, the website. I have some questions to get to know you and your journey a little bit better. The first thing that I would be curious before we launch into those rapid fire questions is, there's so much content out there, and you actually you are a content creator in many ways as well. How do you filter? Like, where do you like to educate yourself? What is platforms or way to filter content that help you to, get a lot of value out of what you're reading?
Yeah, I think segmentation, or trying to figure out where you want to, I suppose, what you want to read to help your audience a bit better. So depending on what I'm doing, I read quite a lot of different marketing books, and yeah, I find books tend to be quite useful. Articles themselves, while can be more up to date, actually can have not as much value, but yeah, certainly a book's got a bit more depth to it. So there's a few kind of marketing textbooks are always quite useful that I tend to find, but equally like trade publications like Marketing Week, and so I tend to stay off the more paid social stuff, more of the generalist marketing activity. But equally, even the platforms themselves can be very useful. So HubSpot has its own academy and it has its own news and blogs, and actually they can be very useful for the different case studies that they're putting forward to different customers, but equally challenging, this is not how you should use this anymore, especially as we move to a cookieless world. That will change very quickly, and we'll need to keep up to date with what the platforms are advising us, especially as they're the ones that ultimately are responsible for how our campaigns perform.
Makes sense. I have some rapid fire questions to wrap it up. Are you ready for those?
Sure, yeah.
What's the last book you read?
The last book I read was a cookbook, actually. Mary Berry's Learn to Cook. So that was my last. So a non-marketing related book at all.
We should make a little plug here for Dinner with Jon, I think. So
yes,
you're running a TikTok channel there, right?
Yes, 270,000 followers on Dinner with Jon. That's Jon on TikTok, yeah, where I do a very short kind of dinner recipes.
Nice, very good. Next question would be, what's the one thing your company is focused on the most at the moment?
Making the most out of HubSpot. So we've kind of brought HubSpot in, automation is going great, but it's extracting, how do we push it to the next level? How do we personalize the website even more? How do we convert, I don't want to say the unconvertible, but yeah, how do we push that needle even further? And how do we make the most of the HubSpot investment?
If there would be no boundaries in tech, what's the one thing you would fix for your role today?
Oh, that is a great question. I would make sure that all data could communicate between systems without any kind of authentication or kind of problems. We used before HubSpot like 20 different systems, and trying to get them to talk to each other was an absolute nightmare. So from certainly a marketing and automation perspective, having everything talk together in unison would be perfect.
What's the last thing that kept you awake at night about a company?
Oh, that's a good idea. So there was a company I worked for, and they didn't have a button in their CRM for people who had died. Ultimately, we will all die, so everyone needs to think about it. And their target demographic was slightly older, so it was probably a bit more pressing. And they didn't have a button for this. So what they did is the wife phoned up, my husband's died, and they said, okay, the call center agent didn't have a button, so they just renamed it to Mr. Dead in the system. Cute, so you can see where this is going. 3 months later, a catalog is posted out to the wife to address to Mr. Dead. And that still gets me every now and again. You're just like, it was in Salesforce, but saving a few grand on putting an extra button in has caused a terrible experience. So yeah, that still keeps me up, being like, what should we do with that? Because ultimately every company needs to think about it, because ultimately either customers will leave or unfortunately they will die, and we need to kind of think of a way of being respectful in those very difficult moments.
The very last question, I would like to do a bit of time travel, right, and go back with you to the days of Swansea University. What's the one advice you would give yourself for your journey? If you put yourself in the shoes of leaving formal education, heading out into the world of marketing and growth, what's the one advice you give yourself for your journey?
I think I'd probably go harder, faster. So I try and push myself even kind of harder. I am quite young to be in my position, but I could have achieved it faster had I believed in myself a bit more. I think I was always a bit like, oh, I don't really want to, or oh, I'm not good enough. But actually, now I am good enough. I'm like, no, we all can get there. But if I believed in myself a little bit more, I think I could have gotten here even faster.
Very nice. And for basically wrapping it up, I really want to appreciate, Jon, that you took the time with us today to be a guest on Python Presents. I want to give you the very last word. If somebody would be forgetting all that we discussed about GetGround today, what's the one thing they should remember?
So GetGround does buy to let done better, and it's all about automating and digitizing the very ancient world of property and property investment.
Thanks a lot for being a guest on Python Presents.
Thank you for having me.